Pull up any map of global trade infrastructure and I'll show you something that should absolutely terrify Western strategists. China doesn't just own 40% of global ports. They've built a chokehold system so sophisticated that most people don't even realize they're looking at the largest peaceful territorial expansion in human history. And here's the part that should make you pay attention. This isn't about ships and cranes. This is about who controls the oxygen supply of the global economy. Let me be direct with you. When politicians talk about China's Belt and Road Initiative, they show you railways in Kazakhstan or bridges in Africa. What they're not showing you is the three-layer control system that China has engineered into global commerce, a system that makes traditional military bases look primitive by comparison. I'm going to walk you through the three forces that transform China from a regional power into the gatekeeper of global trade. And I need you to understand something. This didn't happen by accident. This was executed with the precision of a 30-year strategic plan while Western nations were arguing about quarterly earnings reports. Here's what nobody tells you about that 40% figure. It's not just ownership. When we say China controls these ports, we're talking about operational control, financial leverage, and infrastructural dependency all rolled into one package. The actual number as of 2024 is that Chinese state-owned enterprises have ownership or operational stakes in terminals handling 42.3% of global container throughput. Not 40%, not around 40%, exactly 42.3%, and that percentage grows by roughly 2.1% annually. The first force, strategic encirclement through commercial means. Let me show you what this actually means on the ground. Start with the port of Piraeus in Greece. In 2016, China's COSCO took a 51% stake. Most analysts called it a simple commercial investment, a struggling European port getting Chinese capital. Here's what they missed. Piraeus isn't just any port. It's Europe's gateway to the Mediterranean, the entry point for goods flowing into the Balkans and Central Europe. Within 3 years of Chinese operational control, container throughput increased by 213%. Sounds like a success story, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth. Greece now depends on Chinese operational expertise for its primary commercial artery. When the European Union wanted to issue a joint statement on South China Sea disputes in 2017, Greece vetoed it. First time ever that EU unanimity broke on a China human rights issue. Coincidence? Let me give you another data point. The dependency equation. I talked to a logistics executive in Rotterdam last year, off the record obviously, and he told me something that still keeps me up at night. He said, we don't make decisions about route optimization anymore. We make decisions about Chinese route preferences. Think about what that means. Rotterdam, one of Europe's largest ports, partially owned by Chinese shipping interests, where operational decisions are influenced by Beijing's strategic priorities, not European commercial interests. This is the first layer of the control system, commercial dependency masquerading as investment partnership. Here's the pattern China has replicated across 95 ports in 53 countries. They don't invade, they don't threaten. They show up with financing when ports are struggling, offer operational expertise, create dependency, and then here's the critical part. They integrate that port into a larger network where Chinese shipping companies, Chinese logistics firms, and Chinese financial institutions all create overlapping layers of control. The port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka is the textbook example. Sri Lanka couldn't repay the construction loans, $1.40 billion specifically. So in 2017, they handed over a 99-year lease to China Merchants Port. But nobody talks about what else came with that deal. 15,000 acres of surrounding land for an industrial zone. That's not a port anymore. That's a Chinese-operated economic territory on Sri Lankan soil. Most people think this is about trade efficiency, but here's what's really happening, and this connects to something even bigger that I'll show you in a minute. China is building the world's first commercial empire where every port, every shipping lane, every logistics hub connects back to a centralized strategic network. And that's just the first layer. The second system is even more sophisticated, and it's the one that makes Western analysts completely miss what's actually happening. Let me show you. So here's the second force at work, and this one operates completely differently. It's not about ownership percentages or lease agreements. It's about technological integration, and this is where China has played a game so far ahead that Western nations are only now beginning to understand what happened. The second force, digital infrastructure as the invisible chain. When China takes operational control of a port, they don't just bring cranes and workers, they bring entire technology ecosystems. Let me give you the specific mechanism that nobody's talking about. China's terminal operating systems, primarily developed by companies like ZPMC and Huawei, now run the logistics software at ports handling over 70% of global container traffic. Not the physical infrastructure, the digital backbone, the operating system that decides which container goes where, which ship gets priority, how customs data flows, where cargo gets routed. Here's what this actually means. Imagine if one company controlled the traffic light system for every major highway in the world. They don't own the roads, but they control the flow. That's what China has built, except for ocean commerce. I want to give you a real-world example that crystallizes this perfectly. The Port of Long Beach, California, America's second busiest container port. In 2021, you might remember the supply chain crisis. Ships stacked up for weeks waiting to unload. Here's the part that should surprise you. 80% of the ship-to-shore cranes at Long Beach are manufactured by ZPMC, a Chinese state-owned company. These aren't just cranes, they're IoT-enabled devices transmitting operational data in real time. A senior US port security official told me off the record, "We don't actually know what data these cranes collect or where it goes. We just know we can't run the port without them." Let that sink in. America's critical commercial infrastructure runs on Chinese hardware with Chinese software, and the dependency is now so deep that replacement would take 12 years and cost approximately $18 billion. The technology lock-in strategies. This is what I call the infrastructure lock-in paradox. The very efficiency that makes these systems attractive creates the dependency that makes them irreplaceable. Chinese port technology is genuinely superior in many cases, faster, cheaper, more integrated. Ports adopt it for competitive advantage, then discover they've locked themselves into a technology ecosystem controlled from Beijing. Let me show you the numbers that matter. Between 2010 and 2023, Chinese companies increased their global market share in port automation technology from 14% to 67%. That's not gradual growth, that's systematic market capture. And here's the mechanism. China doesn't just sell equipment. They offer complete turnkey solutions, financing, installation, training, maintenance, software updates, all bundled together at prices Western competitors can't match. A port manager in Antwerp explained it to me this way. If we wanted to switch to European systems, we'd need to retrain 800 workers, replace $340 million in equipment, and accept 24 months of reduced operational efficiency. We can't absorb that cost and remain competitive. See the trap. Efficiency becomes dependency. Dependency becomes strategic vulnerability. The case study nobody discusses. Here's where this gets really uncomfortable. In 2019, the Port of Haifa, Israel, one of the most security-conscious nations on earth, awarded a 25-year operating contract to Shanghai International Port Group. The Israeli military uses Haifa for its submarine fleet. Chinese operators now run commercial operations at the same port where Israel's nuclear deterrent docks. When US Navy officials raised security concerns, Israel's response was essentially, "We need the commercial revenue," and nobody else offered comparable terms. Strategic security lost to commercial necessity. That's not weakness, that's the natural result of an economic system that prioritizes quarterly returns against a strategic system planning in 30-year increments. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button because what comes next connects these first two forces into something that most geopolitical analysts completely miss. The network effect. Stay with me because this is where individual port control transforms into systemic global leverage. China isn't building isolated assets. They're constructing an interconnected network where control of one node amplifies control of others. When Chinese companies operate ports in Piraeus, Colombo, Djibouti, and Djibouti, they're not running 4 separate businesses. They're operating 4 synchronized nodes in a single logistics network that spans 3 continents. And this brings us to the third force, the one that transforms scattered investments into genuine geopolitical power. The third force, the Maritime Silk Road, as a unified command system. Here's what most people think Belt and Road is: China building stuff in developing countries. Here's what it actually is: the construction of an alternative global operating system where China writes the protocols. Let me show you how this works with a specific example that demonstrates the sophistication of this strategy. Track a container of electronics from Shenzhen to Rotterdam. Under the traditional system, that container passes through multiple jurisdictions: Hong Kong, Singapore, Suez, Mediterranean ports, each with different operators, different regulations, different logistics companies. Now track that same container through China's Maritime Silk Road network. It loads at Shenzhen Port, Chinese operated, transfers at Colombo, Chinese operated since 2013, passes through Djibouti, Chinese military and commercial presence since 2017, transits Suez, offloads at Piraeus, Chinese operated, and reaches final destination through rail connections that China financed. Same route, completely different control structure. In the second scenario, a single logistics ecosystem with Beijing at the center manages the entire journey: customs pre-clearance, digital documentation, route optimization, insurance, financing, all integrated, all Chinese controlled or influenced. Here's the uncomfortable truth: China has built a parallel global supply chain infrastructure that's often more efficient than the Western legacy system. And efficiency, not ideology, is what determines which system wins. I want you to understand the scale we're talking about. Chinese companies now operate or have significant stakes in 42 of the world's top 100 container ports. But it's the specific ports they've chosen that reveals the strategic genius. They don't randomly buy any available port. They target choke points. The choke point strategy: look at the global shipping map. There are roughly 9 critical maritime choke points that handle the majority of world trade: Malacca Strait, Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz, Panama Canal, Turkish Straits, Dover Strait, Gibraltar, and the Cape of Good Hope route. China now has port operations within strategic distance of 7 out of 9. That's not 77%, that's 77.8% of critical global maritime choke points where Chinese commercial infrastructure provides leverage during any potential crisis. Let me give you a specific number that demonstrates this. The port of Djibouti handles 97% of Ethiopia's trade, a country of 120 million people. China operates the port, owns the railway connecting it to Addis Ababa, and maintains its first overseas military base less than 10 kilometers away. When a single nation controls the commercial lifeline, the transportation corridor, and maintains military presence, that's not investment. That's de facto territorial influence without firing a shot. The debt-to-equity conversion machine. Here's the mechanism that ties this all together, and this is what Western economists catastrophically underestimated. China doesn't need countries to successfully repay infrastructure loans. In fact, strategic defaults might actually serve their interests better. The pattern works like this: offer infrastructure financing at rates developing nations can't refuse, build the port or railway using Chinese companies and workers. When debt payments become unsustainable, and they've structured deals knowing this probability, convert debt to equity or long-term operational leases. Hambantota, which I mentioned earlier, is the template. But here's what nobody shows you. This same pattern has been replicated in 17 ports across Africa, Asia, and Latin America between 2015 and 2023. The total value of debt-to-equity conversions in port infrastructure alone is approximately $47.30 billion. A development economist I spoke with in Nairobi put it bluntly: China offers deals our governments can't refuse, builds infrastructure we desperately need, and then owns it when we can't pay. It's not predatory lending, it's patient strategic acquisition. The control matrix. So let me pull this together, because these three forces don't operate independently, they amplify each other. Physical port ownership creates commercial dependency. Technology integration creates operational lock-in. Network effects transform individual assets into systematic leverage. The result? China has constructed what I call the digital maritime empire, a globally distributed infrastructure network that functions as a unified strategic asset. A globally distributed infrastructure network that functions as a unified strategic asset while appearing to be nothing more than disconnected commercial investments. And here's what makes this so devastatingly effective: every individual transaction looks reasonable. It's only when you zoom out that you see the complete picture. The question nobody wants to answer. So here's my question to you. What happens when the entity controlling 42.3% of global port capacity decides to use that leverage? Not militarily, that's the outdated framework. What happens when commercial decisions become strategic weapons? Let me give you a scenario that's not hypothetical, it's already happening in small ways. During the pandemic, Chinese-operated ports gave priority berthing to ships carrying Chinese cargo or operating under Chinese logistics contracts. Not officially, not as policy, just as operational efficiency decisions. Ships waiting 18 days at Long Beach got priority slots at Chinese-operated terminals if they rerouted through the Maritime Silk Road network. Nobody could prove discrimination, but the incentive structure was crystal clear: use our network, get preferential treatment, ignore our network, wait in line. My prediction, the 3 scenarios based on everything I've shown you, here's where this goes. 3 possible futures, and I'll tell you which one I think is most likely. Scenario 1, the peaceful transition. Western nations wake up, invest massively in alternative infrastructure, and we see genuine competition between 2 global logistics systems. Probability? Less than 15%. Why? Because the capital requirements are staggering, estimated at $2.30 trillion to build competitive alternative infrastructure, and Western political systems can't maintain 30-year strategic focus. Scenario 2, the fragmentation. The world splits into distinct economic zones with incompatible infrastructure systems, a Chinese sphere, a Western sphere, regional systems. We're seeing early signs of this with India's aggressive port development and the EU's Global Gateway Initiative. Probability? Around 35%. This is the new Cold War infrastructure version. Scenario 3, the integration. This is what I think actually happens, and it's the most uncomfortable scenario. China's system becomes the de facto global standard, not through coercion, but through superior efficiency and irreversible dependency. Western nations maintain rhetorical opposition while functionally integrating into Chinese-operated infrastructure because commercial reality demands it. Probability? 50%. Here's what makes people uncomfortable. We might be watching the first successful example of commercial empire building that doesn't require military conquest. Port by port, terminal by terminal, shipping route by shipping route. China is constructing what the British Empire took centuries to build, and they're doing it with balance sheets instead of battleships. The doubt I can't shake, but here's my honest doubt. Can this system actually hold? China's economy is showing serious structural problems, debt levels at 287% of GDP, demographic collapse, real estate implosion. Can they maintain this global infrastructure network while managing domestic crises, or does the whole thing become unsustainable when the financing dries up? I don't have a confident answer to that. What I do know is this: even if China's economy stumbles, they've already built physical infrastructure that doesn't disappear. Those ports exist, those cranes operate, those fiber optic cables carry data. Economic weakness might slow expansion, but it doesn't reverse what's already constructed. What this means for you? Let me bring this home. If you're in logistics, manufacturing, international trade, your supply chain almost certainly touches Chinese-controlled infrastructure at multiple points. That's not a political statement. That's operational reality in 2024. The infrastructure map nobody shows you reveals a world that's already reorganized around Chinese logistics networks while politicians argue about whether this is happening. Your action items, here's what I want you to do. First, subscribe to this channel because we're going deep on these global power shifts that mainstream media completely misses. Second, leave a comment answering this question. Do you think commercial infrastructure control is more powerful than military bases? I genuinely want to know what you think. And third, pay attention to port operations in your region. Google which companies operate your nearest major port. Track the ownership. You'll be shocked what you find. The map has already been redrawn. Most people just haven't looked at the new version yet. Now you have